when I acknowledge our deep sadness following yesterday's disaster in the Ukraine. For all of us who have lost fellow countrymen and women in the tragedy, words cannot do justice to our sense of loss. For Australians and for our Malaysian brothers and sisters in the Commonwealth, the crash is a particularly cruel tragedy coming so soon after the loss of MH17.
The images were haunting, enough to chill anyone who saw them. The body of a plane falling straight from the sky, suitcases scattered, and the victims lying across the fields. In a single moment, a jet carrying 298 innocent people was torn apart by a surface-to-air missile. A deadly mistake. This tragedy revealed the hidden dangers of civilian planes crossing war zones and the shocking gaps in the global safety warning system. It raises the question, are flights really as safe as we think, and how must aviation change to protect its passengers? On the morning of July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17 stood ready at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, waiting to cross half the globe to Kuala Lumpur. The aircraft was a Boeing 777-200ER, one of the safest and most reliable long-haul jets in the skies. Before departure, engineers and ground crew performed their checks with precision, ensuring the plane was fully fueled, the systems were working, and nothing seemed out of order. The weather over the Netherlands was clear and calm, giving no hint of the disaster that would soon unfold. Inside the terminal, families said their last goodbyes and travelers rushed to their gates, unaware this would be their final boarding call. On board were 283 passengers and 15 crew members, representing a diverse mix of nations and backgrounds. The majority were Dutch, 193 in total, but there were also Malaysians, Australians, Indonesians, Germans, Britons, Belgians, Filipinos, a Canadian, and a New Zealander. Among them were 80 children, some traveling with parents, others visiting relatives abroad. Entire families spanning 3 generations were seated together, excited for vacations and reunions. There were also well-known names, leading scientists on their way to Melbourne for an international AIDS conference, a Dutch senator, an Australian novelist, and a Malaysian actress. The cabin crew was highly experienced, with 2 captains and 2 first officers assigned to share the cockpit duties during the 11-hour flight. Their professionalism reflected Malaysia Airlines' reputation at the time, even though the company was already under pressure from the mysterious disappearance of flight MH17 just 4 months earlier. As the jet prepared to taxi, a passenger snapped a photo of the gleaming white and red fuselage resting at the gate. That simple picture, later shared online, became one of the most haunting reminders of a day that changed aviation history. At 12:31 p.m. local time, the engines roared, and the Boeing 777 lifted off into the bright summer sky. The climb was smooth, the seatbelt signs went off, and passengers began settling into their long journey eastward. For those on board, it was supposed to be just another routine flight, one of thousands that cross Europe's skies each day. Yet, as the aircraft soared toward its cruising altitude, its flight path would soon intersect with a region already torn apart by war. While MH17 climbed eastward, the land below told a very different story. Eastern Ukraine, known as the Donbass, was already burning in the summer of 2014 as pro-Russian separatists fought Ukrainian forces for control of towns and territory. The conflict had erupted only months earlier after Russia's annexation of Crimea and quickly escalated into open battles across cities like Donetsk and Luhansk. Civilians on the ground lived in fear of shelling, while the skies above filled with military jets, transport planes, and anti-aircraft fire. This was no ordinary war zone. It was one where the boundaries between civilian life and combat blurred by the day. By July, several Ukrainian aircraft had already been shot down, sending shockwaves through the region. On June 14th, a Ukrainian Il-76 transport plane was hit as it tried to land in Luhansk, killing all 49 people on board. Just a month later, on July 14th, an An-26 flying at 21,000 feet was brought down, proof that weapons more advanced than shoulder-fired missiles were now in use. Military experts began warning that the separatists had acquired heavy surface-to-air missile systems, the kind capable of striking planes at commercial cruising altitudes. Ukraine's aviation authorities responded by closing airspace below 32,000 feet, assuring airlines that flying higher would keep them safe. But critics were not convinced. The International Civil Aviation Organization, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, and European regulators all raised concerns, pointing out that combatants were already testing long-range weapons. Major airlines like British Airways, Air France, and Lufthansa adjusted their routes to avoid the area entirely, even if it meant longer flights and higher costs. Yet Malaysia Airlines continued to use the Donbass corridor, viewing it as the most direct and fuel-efficient path to Southeast Asia. In aviation, cost-saving decisions often come down to narrow margins, but in a conflict zone, those margins can mean life or death. For passengers booking tickets, there was no warning about the risks. To them, the skies seemed peaceful, and a ticket on MH17 promised nothing more than a long but uneventful journey. What they did not know was that on the very same day, heavy weapons were being moved across the border, ready to alter the fate of everyone on that plane. So how did a powerful missile system end up in the middle of eastern Ukraine, and who was really in control of it? On the morning of July 17, 2014, unusual movement was reported near the town of Snizhna in eastern Ukraine. Residents and local journalists saw a military convoy passing through, and among the trucks and armored vehicles, one machine stood out, a Buk M1 surface-to-air missile launcher. The launcher was mounted on a tracked vehicle, carried on a transport truck, and flanked by armed escorts who warned bystanders not to take pictures. Despite the threats, reporters from the Associated Press managed to capture images showing the weapon as it rolled through the streets. These pictures would later become critical evidence in the international investigation. The Buk M1 was no ordinary weapon. It was designed in the Soviet Union and could strike aircraft at altitudes up to 82,000 feet, far above the cruising level of most passenger jets. Its radar system could track multiple targets at once, and its missiles carried powerful warheads filled with hundreds of metal fragments, built to shred aircraft into pieces. Unlike small portable launchers often used by militias, the Buk required a trained crew to operate. Radar operators, missile technicians, and a commander were needed to prepare and fire it correctly, raising doubts about whether separatist fighters alone could handle such a system. Later investigations by the Joint Investigation Team traced this specific launcher back to Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Brigade, based in Kursk. According to witness accounts and intercepted communications, the unit crossed the border into Ukraine on the very day of the disaster. By the evening of July 17th, the same launcher was seen retreating back toward Russia, this time missing one of its 4 missiles. The presence of the Buk raised disturbing questions. Who gave the order to deploy it, and what mission was it meant to fulfill? For people in Donbass, the answer seemed clear. It was there to defend separatist territory from Ukrainian military aircraft that had been bombing their strongholds. But in the fog of war, the line between military and civilian targets was dangerously thin. That thin line would vanish when the book's radar locked onto an aircraft cruising high above the clouds. And a crew made the decision that would turn a routine flight into one of the worst aviation tragedies in modern history. What exactly happened in those final seconds when MH17 crossed paths with the book's sights? At 1:20 p.m. local time, MH17 cruised steadily at 33,000 feet, its white fuselage cutting across the clear blue above eastern Ukraine. In the cockpit, the pilots requested a slight change of course to avoid storm clouds, then returned to the main route, unaware that every movement was being tracked by radar below. Inside the cabin, flight attendants rolled carts down the aisles, passengers unbuckled seatbelts, and children leaned against windows, watching the clouds drift past. It was the picture of routine, but just miles beneath them, a Buk missile system was locked onto their flight. The crew operating the launcher mistook the large jet for a Ukrainian military transport aircraft, a target they had shot down before. A single command was given, and within seconds, a missile ignited, tearing into the sky at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The missile climbed fast, its seeker homing in on the radar reflection of the Boeing above. In less than half a minute, it closed the gap and detonated near the cockpit, releasing hundreds of razor-sharp fragments. Experts later counted about 800 steel cubes and bow-tie-shaped pieces packed inside the warhead, designed to slice through aircraft skin and systems with brutal efficiency. The windshield shattered instantly, metal tore open, and the pilots had no time to react. All 3 men in the cockpit were killed on impact, leaving the jet without control. The front of the plane broke apart, while shockwaves ripped through the cabin, severing vital systems and throwing debris into the rushing air. Sections of the fuselage twisted and snapped, and within moments, the aircraft began to disintegrate over the countryside. For the passengers, the loss of pressure and oxygen came so suddenly that most never felt the fall. Investigators later confirmed that many were unconscious in seconds as freezing air flooded the cabin and gravity pulled them down. What remained of the jet rained across fields and villages, scattering luggage, seats, and fragments of bodies over an area stretching more than 50 square kilometers. The entire sequence, from launch to breakup, lasted less than 1 minute, yet it would echo across global headlines for years to come. The explosion silenced 298 voices, each with a story, each with a future that ended in the same instant. But when the wreckage hit the ground, the tragedy was far from over. What did people on the ground see as the burning remains of MH17 fell into their villages and fields? When the wreckage of MH17 began to rain down, the people of Donetsk region looked up in shock. Fields of sunflowers and quiet villages suddenly became a scene of horror as fireballs streaked through the sky. Metal fragments whistled as they fell, and then came the thuds of debris hitting the ground one after another. Homes shook from the impact, and smoke columns rose where burning pieces landed. Villagers ran into the open, only to see airplane seats, torn luggage, and even human bodies scattered across farmland. Local witnesses later described the silence that followed, broken only by the sound of small fires crackling in the fields. Some saw the cockpit section smashed into the earth, while others found fragments of wings and engines lying far apart. Among the wreckage were heartbreaking details: children's toys, passports, and half-open suitcases spilling clothes across the grass. The horror became undeniable as rescuers and villagers discovered dozens of bodies lying in unnatural positions, many still strapped into their seats. There were no survivors. But what shocked investigators was not just the scale of destruction, but the way the site was handled in the hours that followed. Armed separatists quickly surrounded the area, setting up checkpoints and blocking access to international journalists and rescue teams. Instead of preserving evidence, there were reports of bodies being moved and wreckage pieces shifted. Video footage later showed fighters appearing confused as they searched the debris, realizing they had downed a civilian plane. Some were even recorded making phone calls, expressing disbelief that the aircraft was not military. The lack of proper control meant valuable clues risked being lost or tampered with, a fact that would complicate later investigations. For families far away, the first images broadcast from the site were unbearable: smoldering wreckage, rows of bodies under makeshift covers, and fields littered with broken lives. It was not only a human tragedy, but also a forensic puzzle, and every misplaced piece of evidence would matter. So how would the world piece together the truth from such chaos, and who would take the lead in the search for justice? In the days after the crash, the world demanded answers, but the path to truth was anything but simple. With the wreckage scattered across a war zone, access for investigators was delayed and heavily restricted. Journalists described scenes of separatists standing guard with rifles, while international experts waited for permission to approach. Even so, a coalition was soon formed to lead the investigation, known as the Joint Investigation Team, or JIT. It included the Netherlands, Malaysia, Australia, Belgium, and Ukraine, each with its own reasons for pursuing justice. The Netherlands took the lead, as most of the victims were Dutch citizens, and the country felt the weight of responsibility to uncover what happened. One of the first tasks was recovering the victims. Rows of coffins were transported back to the Netherlands in solemn convoys, with people lining the highways to pay respect as the processions passed. A national day of mourning was declared, the first in decades, as the country came together in grief. Meanwhile, forensic experts began piecing together the technical puzzle. Fragments of metal were pulled from the bodies of pilots, many shaped like tiny cubes and bow ties, matching the warhead of a book missile. Investigators reconstructed parts of the Boeing 777 from thousands of debris pieces, arranging them in a hangar to trace the path of the explosion. The black boxes, recovered after tense negotiations, revealed a sudden and catastrophic end. A single loud sound lasting just 2.3 milliseconds before all recordings stopped. These findings painted a clear picture. A book missile had detonated just outside the cockpit, killing the crew instantly and tearing the plane apart in mid-air. Intercepted phone calls between separatist leaders also surfaced, pointing to Russian-supplied weaponry and coordination across the border. Every piece of evidence narrowed the circle of responsibility, and denial from Moscow only fueled determination to prove the case. After years of work, the JIT presented its conclusion. The missile launcher belonged to Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Brigade, and it was brought into Ukraine, fired, and then returned across the border. This was no accident of war. It was a chain of actions that could be traced step by step. Yet even with the evidence laid out, one question still lingered in the minds of many. What consequences would follow for those who carried out and supported this deadly attack? Justice for MH17 was never going to be quick, but the search for accountability did not stop. In 2020, Dutch prosecutors brought 4 men to trial, 3 Russians and 1 Ukrainian, accused of helping transport and operate the Buk missile system. The court heard intercepted phone calls, radar data, and forensic proof, showing how the launcher crossed the border, fired its missile, and then returned to Russia. 2 years later, in 2022, the judges reached their verdict. 3 of the men were sentenced to life in prison in absentia, confirming that Moscow had control over separatist forces at the time. Even though the men were not physically in court, the decision carried huge symbolic weight. It was a statement that the world had not forgotten the 298 victims and that those behind the attack could not hide forever. The International Civil Aviation Organization, a UN body, went further by declaring Russia responsible for violating international aviation law. This gave new strength to lawsuits from the Netherlands and Australia, both demanding compensation for the families and pointing to Russia's role in arming the separatists. For Malaysia Airlines, the tragedy was almost unbearable. Only months earlier, the airline had lost flight MH17, which vanished without a trace, and now MH17 had been shot down in full view of the world. 2 disasters in such a short time shook the airline to its core, leading to financial collapse, mass layoffs, and the loss of public trust. It became a symbol of how fragile even a global carrier could be when struck by forces beyond its control. On a wider level, MH17 turned into a reminder that no civilian flight can be assumed safe when war rages on the ground. The blue sky, once seen as a neutral space, was revealed to be vulnerable to the weapons of modern conflict. Families of the victims still gather each year at memorials where the message is clear: the cost of ignoring danger zones is measured in lives, not statistics. Yet one haunting question still remains. If MH17 was not the first civilian plane destroyed in a conflict, could it also fail to be the last? MH17 was not the first time a civilian airliner was caught in the crossfire of global conflict. Decades earlier, in 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007 lifted off from New York bound for Seoul, carrying 269 people. When the Boeing 747 drifted off course and entered Soviet airspace, fighter jets scrambled to intercept. Believing the large jet was a U.S. spy plane, the Soviets launched 2 missiles, striking the aircraft over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors, and the Cold War tension that followed nearly pushed superpowers into open conflict. 5 years later, in 1988, another tragedy unfolded in the Persian Gulf. Iran Air Flight 655, an Airbus A300 on a routine flight from Tehran to Dubai, was mistaken for a hostile F-14 fighter jet by the USS Vincennes, a U.S. Navy cruiser. A missile struck the plane, killing all 290 people on board, including 66 children. The U.S. called it a mistake, but for many Iranians it became a symbol of reckless military power and deep mistrust. In 2001, another airliner became a victim, this time during a military exercise. Siberia Airlines Flight 1812, a Tupolev Tu-154, flying from Tel Aviv to Novosibirsk, was accidentally hit by a Ukrainian surface-to-air missile fired during training over the Black Sea. 78 passengers and crew died, most of them Israeli citizens, reminding the world that even practice drills could turn deadly. The danger had already been made clear in 1973 when Libyan Arab Airlines Flight 114, a Boeing 727, strayed into the Sinai Peninsula, which was then under Israeli control during wartime. Israeli fighter jets shot it down after failed attempts to redirect the flight, leaving 108 of the 113 people on board dead. Perhaps the most mysterious case came in 1980 with the crash of Aviation Flight 870, a DC-9 carrying 81 people off the coast of Italy. Investigators and journalists later pointed to signs that the plane may have been hit during a secret dogfight between NATO and Libyan jets. To this day, Italy's Ustica massacre remains unsolved, wrapped in secrecy and political denials. Together, these disasters show a chilling truth. When war machines operate near civilian skies, mistakes and misidentifications can kill hundreds in seconds. The list is long, the story's heartbreaking, and yet the question keeps returning. If so many tragedies have already happened, what steps did the aviation world finally take after MH17 to prevent history from repeating itself? The downing of MH17 forced the aviation world to face a truth that had long been ignored. Civilian aircraft were not untouchable, and flying over conflict zones carried risks that could no longer be brushed aside. In the past, information about air defense systems or missile activity was often treated as a military secret, locked away by governments. Airlines had to rely on scattered reports and official no-fly zones, which meant that crucial warnings often arrived too late or not at all. MH17 shattered this system, proving that silence and delay could cost hundreds of innocent lives. The International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, responded by creating the Global Aviation Safety Risk System, known as GASRS. This became a central platform where nations could quietly share sensitive data about possible threats in the sky, such as missile deployments or anti-aircraft activity. The system was designed to keep military secrets safe while still warning airlines in time, giving pilots and planners the chance to reroute before it was too late. It was a major shift because for the first time, the industry had a global tool dedicated to tracking risks in war zones. But the change did not stop there. Before MH17, most airlines assumed that if a country had not closed its airspace, then flights were safe. The tragedy proved this assumption deadly wrong, and responsibility began to move away from local governments toward the airlines themselves and the regulators in their home countries. Now, agencies like the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States and the European Union Aviation Safety Agency must create their own risk assessments. They do not wait for a foreign government to issue bans. Instead, they analyze intelligence, follow battlefield reports, and study real-time data from GASRS. The warnings they publish are more detailed, sometimes allowing flights only at certain altitudes or advising complete avoidance of a region. For airlines, this meant that safety decisions became far more complex. Large carriers built their own analysis teams, but smaller airlines often lacked the staff or resources to do the same. This gave rise to a new industry. Private risk assessment firms like Osprey Flight Solutions and Risk Advisory, They provide real-time reports to airlines willing to pay, turning safety into both a service and a business. At the same time, governments and regulators began to release more information directly to the public. Maps of risky airspace and official warnings are now posted openly by the FAA and EASA, giving even small airlines and passengers access to crucial knowledge. This shift toward transparency was meant to prevent any repeat of the excuses heard after MH17, when everyone claimed they did not know the skies were unsafe. The changes reshaped the way aviation handles danger, but they also raised new questions. If wars keep spreading and weapons become more advanced, can even the best safety systems truly keep civilian flights out of harm's way? MH17 was not just a tragedy, it was a seismic rupture in the global conscience. In one horrifying instant, 298 souls vanished from the sky, and with them, the comforting illusion that commercial air travel was immune to the chaos of conflict. Families were shattered, communities mourned, and the world stood still, grappling with the realization that even the heavens could be weaponized. The aftermath was a blur of grief and reckoning. Courtrooms echoed with demands for justice, memorials bloomed across continents, and aviation authorities scrambled to erect new safety protocols. These efforts, though earnest, could never mend the broken hearts or restore the lives lost. The pain became a permanent scar etched into the lives of those left behind. For the families, the grief is not a chapter. It is the entire book. Every birthday missed, every empty chair at dinner, every unanswered message is a reminder that their loved ones were stolen by a senseless act. And for the aviation industry, the message was brutally clear. Human lives must always outweigh political agendas, financial calculations, or bureaucratic silence. Yet even as the world vowed never again, the skies remain vulnerable. Conflicts rage on, borders blur, and technology evolves faster than diplomacy. Surface-to-air missiles still exist, tensions still simmer, and the haunting question lingers like turbulence on a clear day. Can we ever guarantee the safety of our skies? Or is another MH17, another unthinkable loss, still waiting in the wings, hidden in the fog of war and indifference? Would you like a version that's more poetic, journalistic, or suited for a speech?